My mother left me bleeding on an emergency room bed, claiming my bursting appendix was ruining her VIP Taylor Swift experience. She called me a nuisance while I begged her to pick up my 5-year-old twins. I hung up, booked an emergency nanny, and survived the surgery. Then I cut off the secret financial lifeline funding her elite lifestyle. Before I tell you how I dismantled my family fake empire, let me know where you are watching from below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members. I am Maya. I am 32, and I work as a crisis public relations executive in Atlanta. My career is built on managing disasters for high-profile clients. Yet the greatest crisis I ever managed was the one masquerading as my own family. Growing up, my parents, Vivian and Marcus, were obsessed with appearances. They were fixtures in elite African American social circles, attending exclusive galas and bragging about generational wealth. The truth was a carefully constructed lie. Their lavish lifestyle was funded by me, the daughter they constantly belittled. The reality of their conditional love hit me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was rushed to the hospital from a client meeting. The pain in my abdomen was a blinding agony, making it impossible to stand. In the emergency room, doctors moved with terrifying speed. My appendix was on the verge of rupturing. They needed to operate immediately. The heart monitor beside my bed beeped frantically, matching the panic rising in my chest. My ex-husband was out of the country, and my 5-year-old twins Leo and Mia were waiting at daycare. The center closed in 45 minutes. Through the haze of pain and IV fluids dripping into my arm, I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother. Vivian was my emergency contact, the person who was supposed to be my safety net. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. Instead of her polished greeting, I was met with the deafening bass of a pop concert. Thousands of people were screaming in the background. "Mom," I gasped, curling into a tight ball as another wave of pain ripped through my stomach. "I am at the hospital. I need emergency surgery right now. Please just pick up Leo and Mia from daycare." There was a moment of hesitation, followed by a theatrical sigh. "Maya." Her voice dripped with irritation. "Chloe and I are in the VIP tent at the Eras Tour. Do you have any idea how hard it was to get these tickets? This cost more than your car." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Mom, please. My appendix is bursting. I am being wheeled into surgery in 10 minutes. The kids have no one else. You are always such a nuisance and a massive burden," she scolded, her tone devoid of maternal concern. "You could have timed this better. Honestly, you are ruining the mood of our bonding trip. Just call an Uber for the kids. I have to go. Taylor is coming on stage right now. Stop calling." The line went dead. I stared at the screen. The call ended, notification mocking my desperation. My mother and sister were drinking champagne in a VIP tent while I faced a fatal medical emergency. A nurse rushed into the room telling me to prepare for anesthesia. I begged her for 2 more minutes. Fighting through the agonizing pain, I opened a premium emergency nanny app. My vision was blurring, the edges of the room turning gray as the pre-surgery medication took effect. I typed in the daycare address and selected the highest premium tier for immediate pickup. When the payment screen popped up, my card details auto-filled. It was my primary platinum card. The exact same card linked to my parents' mortgage account. The exact same account that paid the monthly dues for their exclusive country club, luxury car leases, and endless shopping sprees for Chloe. For 5 years, I had been the silent benefactor of their elite facade. They told society friends their money came from a trust established by my grandfather Winston. They hid the fact that the black sheep daughter, the one they called a burden, was working 80-hour weeks to keep a roof over their heads. I hit confirm, securing a caregiver just as the surgical team wheeled me down the corridor. I woke in a recovery room. The sharp pain was gone, replaced by a dull ache. A nurse informed me the surgery was a success. My first thought was of my children. I borrowed a phone to call the nanny service and breathed a sigh of relief when they confirmed Leo and Mia were safely eating dinner at home. My children were safe, and my heart was cold. I did not shed tears. There was no sadness left, only a profound emptiness. I pulled out my phone. There were no missed calls from Vivian. No texts from Chloe asking if I survived. Only notifications showing Chloe tagging our mother in glamorous concert selfies. I opened my banking app displaying the autopay schedule I maintained for a decade. Without hesitation, I tapped the mortgage payment for their suburban mansion. Cancel autopay. Confirm. Next, I navigated to authorized users. The secondary platinum card for Chloe sat at the top. Freeze account. Confirm. I dismantled every financial safety net I wove for them. Country club dues, car insurance, utility bills. All canceled. As I set my phone down, a deep peace washed over me. For years, I believed I could buy their love, that if I provided enough, they would see my worth. I was wrong. As I lay in that hospital bed, I knew one thing for certain. The next time my family swiped their cards, they were going to learn exactly how much of a burden I really was. I smiled as the screen faded to black, ready for tomorrow. Finally, exactly 3 weeks passed since my emergency surgery. My physical recovery was slow, but my mental clarity had never been sharper. I spent days deliberately ignoring the increasingly frantic voicemails from my mother and sister. I knew they would come for me eventually. I just had to sit and wait for the harsh reality of their empty bank accounts to set in. The confrontation finally arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. The front door flew open. I had forgotten to revoke my mother keypad access. Vivian stormed into my foyer with Marcus trailing close behind her. Chloe marched in right next, clutching a designer handbag like a protective shield. But it was Chloe's husband Preston who took the lead. Preston was a senior vice president at a major finance firm. He was a wealthy white man who had married into our elite African-American family primarily for the prestige and the supposed generational wealth my parents constantly bragged about. He always carried himself with an insufferable arrogance, treating me like the unfortunate struggling relative who needed his unsolicited financial advice. Today his face was flushed red with anger. He stepped right up to my kitchen island, invading my personal space, and pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "Are you completely out of your mind, Maya?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Chloe was humiliated this morning. Her platinum card was declined at Saks Fifth Avenue in front of everyone. And your parents just received a certified foreclosure warning from the bank. You need to stop this little tantrum immediately and fix whatever glitch you caused in the family accounts. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The warmth of the chamomile grounded me. I looked at the four of them standing in my kitchen demanding my compliance. Vivian was glaring at me with pure hatred. Marcus looked embarrassed but expectant. Chloe was actually pouting, and Preston stood there waiting for me to apologize and obey his commands. "There is no glitch." "Preston," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even, "I simply stopped paying for their lifestyle. I canceled the autopay on the mortgage and I froze Chloe's supplementary credit card." Preston scoffed, crossing his arms over his tailored suit. "What are you talking about? You do not pay their mortgage. Your parents are funded by Grandpa Winston Trust. You are just a public relations manager. You do not have the capital to fund this family. Stop playing games and transfer the funds back." Chloe is highly distressed. I placed my teacup on the marble counter. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a thick manila folder. I had prepared this exact folder the day I returned from the hospital. I tossed it onto the island, letting it slide right to Preston's fingertips. "Why do not you take a look at the financial savior of this family, Preston?" I suggested. Preston narrowed his eyes but picked up the folder. Chloe tried to snatch it away from him, but he stepped back and opened it. I watched his eyes scan the documents. I had included 5 years of bank statements, wire transfers, and credit card bills. Every single document bore my name, my income, my hard-earned money being siphoned directly into the accounts of the people standing in my kitchen. I watched the color drain from Preston's face as his eyes darted across the pages. He saw the monthly transfers covering the mortgage on the sprawling estate he thought was fully paid off. He saw the statements for the luxury cars they leased under my credit score. He saw the ridiculous shopping sprees, the expensive country club dinners, the first-class vacations. All of it paid for by the woman he had spent the last 4 years treating like a charity case. "You thought you married into generational wealth?" I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence in the room. "You thought Chloe was an heiress with a trust fund. I hate to break it to you, Preston, but the only wealth keeping your wife in designer shoes is the salary I make cleaning up corporate disasters. There is no trust fund money covering their bills. It was always me. And I am done." Preston turned to look at Chloe. His expression shifted from arrogance to absolute betrayal. "You told me your grandfather bought the house," he hissed at her. "You told me the credit card was tied to a family corporate account." Chloe shrank back, stammering and looking to our mother for help. Vivian stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the narrative. She puffed out her chest, refusing to accept defeat or admit her lies. "This is completely inappropriate!" Vivian shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are a terrible, ungrateful daughter. We gave you life, and this is how you repay us, by trying to humiliate your sister in front of her husband. You have a duty to this family, a duty to a family that leaves me to die in a hospital so they can attend a pop concert," I asked. "I think my duty has been fulfilled, Mom. The bank accounts stay closed. You can figure out how to pay your own bills from now on." Vivian's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. She pulled her phone from her purse, wielding it like a weapon. "You think you are so smart, Maya. You think you have the power here. I will call Grandpa Winston right now. I will tell him you are financially abusing us. I will tell him you have lost your mind and are trying to destroy the family name. I will have him disinherit you completely. He will cut you out of the real trust forever." She held the phone up, waiting for me to panic. She expected me to beg. She expected the threat of Grandpa Winston Trust to force me back into submission. I looked at my furious mother standing there, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I looked at the panicked faces of my father and sister, and the deeply horrified realization dawning on my arrogant brother-in-law. I picked up my teacup, took one final sip, relishing the absolute silence in the room, and smiled directly at her. "Call him." The morning after I kicked my family out of my kitchen, the doorbell rang before I even finished my first cup of coffee. I expected to find my mother Vivian standing on the porch ready for round 2 of her demands. Instead, I opened my front door to find a woman in a crisp gray suit holding a clipboard. Standing right behind her, looking incredibly smug in his tailored designer overcoat, was my brother-in-law, Preston. "Good morning, Ms. Winston," the woman said. Her tone was strictly professional, but her eyes scanned my foyer looking for any sign of chaos. "I am Agent Davis with Child Protective Services. We received an urgent report regarding the welfare of your 5-year-old twins, Leo and Mia. May we come in?" I felt a brief spike of pure adrenaline, but my crisis public relations training kicked in instantly. Panic is the enemy of strategy. I opened the door wider and gestured for them to enter. "Of course, Agent Davis," I said, keeping my voice warm and steady. "Please come into the living room. Leo and Mia are currently at school, but I am happy to answer any questions you have." Preston walked in trailing behind the agent like he owned the place. He was playing the role of the deeply concerned wealthy uncle perfectly. His arrogance filled the entire room. He actually had the audacity to sigh heavily and shake his head as if observing a tragedy. He thought his status as a wealthy white finance executive gave him ultimate authority over a black single mother. He assumed the system would automatically side with him. "Maya, we are just so worried about you," Preston said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "After your sudden hospitalization and the erratic financial behavior you displayed yesterday, Chloe and I felt we had no choice. We had to step in for the safety of the children." Agent Davis took a seat on my sofa, clicking her pen. "Ms. Winston, the report claims you recently suffered a severe medical episode that left you mentally unstable. It also alleges that you are exhibiting financial mania, cutting off support for dependent family members, and neglecting your parental duties." Mr. Preston here has generously offered to take temporary custody of the twins until you undergo a psychiatric evaluation. I looked at Preston. He gave me a tiny knowing smirk. It was a blatant extortion attempt. He used his privilege and his corporate connections to fast-track a false child abuse report simply because his wife had her credit card declined at a department store. He thought the threat of losing my children would break me. He thought I would crumble hand over my banking passwords and beg for his mercy to keep my family intact. Preston stood up and walked over to my window, pretending to look out at the garden. "Agent Davis, could I have a brief moment alone with my sister-in-law?" he asked. "I think I can reason with her." Agent Davis nodded and focused on her paperwork. Preston stepped close to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Turn the auto-pay back on Maya," he whispered, his tone turning cold and vicious. "Reinstate the accounts immediately. Pay the mortgage and apologize to Chloe. If you do exactly what I say, I will tell the agent it was all a misunderstanding. If you refuse, I will drag you through family court and you will not see those kids until they are in high school. I have the best lawyers in the city. You cannot win against me." I did not back away. I did not blink. I simply smiled at him. It was the exact same smile I used when a corrupt corporate client tried to lie to me about an embezzlement scandal. I turned my back on Preston and walked over to my home office desk. I opened my locked drawer and pulled out a thick bound leather portfolio. I had not just prepared financial documents for my family. I had prepared a complete defense protocol. When you work in crisis management, you learn to anticipate every possible angle of attack. I knew they would try to hit me where it hurt most. I walked back to the living room and handed the heavy portfolio directly to Agent Davis. "Agent Davis, I understand you have to follow up on every report," I said smoothly, "but I think you will find everything you need right there." She opened the portfolio. The first page was a notarized medical clearance from my attending surgeon stating I was in perfect physical and mental health following a routine appendectomy. The second page was a glowing character reference from the headmaster of the elite private academy my twins attended, confirming their tuition was paid in full and they were thriving, happy children. Agent Davis flipped to the next section, her eyebrows raised slightly. "I also took the liberty of running a comprehensive background check on the man offering to take custody of my children." I continued, projecting my voice so Preston could hear every single word. "As a single mother, I am highly protective of who interacts with Leo and Mia. I think you will find the final section of that portfolio very interesting." Preston shifted his weight, his posture suddenly stiff. "What is she talking about?" he demanded, stepping forward. Agent Davis was reading the documents. They detailed Preston's history of aggressive corporate litigation, multiple sealed complaints from former female employees at his finance firm, and his recent erratic gambling debts hidden in offshore accounts. It was a goldmine of terrible behavior I had slowly compiled over the years, just in case my sister-husband ever tried to cross me. "Ms. Winston, these are very detailed records," Agent Davis said, her professional tone shifting from suspicious to impressed. Preston's face was losing its color rapidly. He realized he had walked right into a trap. He tried to laugh it off, adjusting his expensive tie. "This is ridiculous. She fabricated all of this. I am a respected senior vice president. I am trying to save her children from a toxic environment." I walked right up to Preston, closing the distance between us. I leaned in close, ensuring Agent Davis was busy reading the offshore account statements. "Did Chloe tell you I am the one who paid off the DUI she caught last year?" I whispered directly into his ear. "Because I have the police reports and the dashcam footage right here in my desk. If you do not walk out of my house this exact second, I will hand them to the agent and explain exactly how often your wife drives drunk around children." Preston backed away from me, slowly taking deep breaths. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He knew I was not bluffing. Agent Davis closed her clipboard and thanked me for my cooperation. She informed Preston the allegations were unfounded and warned him about penalties for filing false reports. Preston did not say another word. He ran out of my front door with Agent Davis behind him. I quickly locked the door. I won the morning battle, but knew my family would not stop there. I knew desperate people always escalate their attacks eventually. 3 nights later, I attended the annual Sapphire Hope Charity Gala, the premier social event for Atlanta elite African American society. For years, my parents used this gala to flaunt their imaginary wealth and secure their status among the city doctors and executives. I had purchased a VIP table for my firm 6 months prior. I refused to let their crisis stop me from enjoying an evening I paid for. I arrived wearing a stunning emerald green gown, feeling powerful and composed. The ballroom was filled with crystal chandeliers and sparkling champagne towers. I was chatting with clients when I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Vivian and Chloe flanking me, wearing designer dresses they undoubtedly purchased before I froze their accounts. Standing behind them were 3 influential socialites, including the gala chairwoman, Mrs. Sterling. Vivian orchestrated this ambush perfectly. She put on a devastated expression and grabbed my hand. "Maya, darling, we are just so worried about you," she announced loud enough to echo over the music, ensuring Mrs. Sterling was listening intently. Chloe chimed in, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "You have not been the same since your surgery, Maya. We know you are having a severe mental breakdown. It is okay to admit you are struggling emotionally. We are your family and we forgive you for your erratic behavior." They were trying to control the narrative. They wanted high society to believe I was a crazy, unhinged daughter, so that when their house went into foreclosure, everyone would blame my supposed mental illness instead of their own financial incompetence. The socialites exchanged uncomfortable glances, whispering behind their champagne flutes. I looked at my mother and sister, recognizing their tactic immediately. They wanted a public scene. They wanted me to yell and scream so they could point fingers and call me unstable. I did not give them the satisfaction. I simply smiled, pulling my hand away from Vivian's grasp. "Excuse me, ladies," I said politely. "The donation segment is beginning and I have a contribution to make." I walked away from their trap and glided straight toward the main stage. The gala host, a prominent local news anchor, was calling for major donor pledges to support a new mental health initiative for underprivileged youth. This was my moment to rewrite the script entirely. I caught the host's eye and gestured for the microphone. Because of my firm reputation in the city, he handed it over without hesitation. The ballroom quieted down as hundreds of wealthy guests turned their attention to me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, projecting my voice clearly and confidently across the silent room. Mental health and family support are vital issues that touch all of us. As many of you know, my parents, Marcus and Vivian Winston, have always prided themselves on their generosity and their commitment to this community. Tonight, I would like to make a special contribution on their behalf. I am pledging $50,000 to the foundation. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I saw Vivian and Marcus puff up their chests near the back of the room, happily taking credit for my money, just as they had done for the past 5 years. But I was not finished. I held up my hand to quiet the applause and kept my eyes locked directly on my mother. I decided to make this donation in their name tonight because they are currently going through a severe financial crisis. I announced, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. Since my parents could not afford their mortgage this month and are currently facing foreclosure, I thought a massive tax write-off would help them much more than the VIP Taylor Swift tickets they prioritized while I was bleeding on an operating table 3 weeks ago. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. I handed the microphone back to the stunned host, gracefully picked up my evening clutch, and walked off the stage. I watched the fake wealthy facade of Vivian and Marcus crumble in real time. The elite socialites who had been listening to their lies just moments ago were now staring at them with absolute pity and disgust. The whispers started immediately spreading through the crowd like wildfire. My parents were exposed as frauds in front of the exact people they spent their entire lives trying to impress. I slowly made my way toward the main exit, feeling much lighter than I had in many long years. I had finally ripped off the Band-Aid and exposed their toxic secrets. But as I stepped into the dimly lit hallway leading to the valet stand, a heavy hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. I spun around to face Preston. His eyes were wide with pure rage, his teeth bared like a cornered animal. "You think you are so smart," he hissed, backing me against the wall. "You think you can just humiliate us and walk away? I am a senior vice president, Maya. You just messed with the wrong guy." I used my firm connections this afternoon and I flagged every single business account tied to your public relations agency for suspicious, fraudulent activity. I just froze your entire livelihood. Let us see how you pay your own bills tomorrow morning. I walked into the sleek downtown offices of my public relations firm the morning after the charity gala feeling completely untouchable. The glass doors slid open to reveal my bustling team handling high-profile clients across the city. The energy in the room was always electric, but today it felt tense. My lead accountant, Elena, was standing directly outside my office suite, holding a stack of red-flagged printouts. Her face was entirely pale. She closed my office door behind us and delivered the bad news. Every single corporate operating account tied to our agency was completely frozen and locked. I sat down at my mahogany desk and looked at the bank insignia on the lockout notices. It was Vanguard Financial, the exact same firm where my arrogant brother-in-law Preston served as a senior vice president. He had not been making empty threats in the hallway of the country club. He actually used his corporate leverage to flag my legitimate business accounts for suspicious fraudulent activity. He weaponized his white-collar privilege to cut off my cash flow, assuming a sudden financial strangulation would force me to surrender to him. He expected me to panic and cry out. He wanted me to beg him to release my funds so he could force me to reinstate the mortgage payments for my parents. Preston fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. You do not survive and thrive in the elite crisis management industry by caving under pressure. When someone tries to bury you under corporate red tape, you do not grab a shovel. You call the person who owns the entire mountain. I did not waste a single second dialing Preston. Instead, I picked up my private cell phone and called a direct line I had not used too recently. The man who answered on the second ring was Richard Sterling. He was the chief executive officer of Vanguard Financial and the man who signed Preston paychecks. Richard Sterling and I had a very specific history. 2 years ago, his firm faced a catastrophic public relations nightmare involving a leaked audio recording of a board meeting. The stock was plummeting, and the board of directors was ready to demand his immediate resignation. I stepped in and orchestrated a flawless media diversion and rebranding campaign that saved his career and stabilized his company. He owed me a massive favor for today. Wealthy men in his position knew the immense value of keeping a crisis manager happy. I requested an urgent in-person meeting. He cleared his morning schedule without hesitation. 45 minutes later, I stepped out of my town car and walked straight into the Vanguard Financial skyscraper. I wore a tailored crimson power suit and carried a single leather briefcase. The receptionist recognized me instantly and escorted me directly to the top floor, bypassing the security lines and the waiting areas. As I walked past the glass-walled executive suites, I caught a brief glimpse of Preston right there. He was sitting at his desk, looking incredibly smug, drinking an espresso. He thought he had destroyed me. He had absolutely no idea the Grim Reaper was walking right past his office door. Richard Sterling greeted me with a firm handshake and offered me a seat at his private conference table. He asked what required such an urgent visit. I did not engage in small talk. I opened my leather briefcase and slid a meticulously organized compliance report across the polished wood. I explained that one of his senior vice presidents was currently bypassing strict internal security protocols very carelessly. He used company access to execute personal family vendettas. I laid out the exact timeline showing how Preston manipulated internal banking algorithms to freeze my corporate accounts simply because I cut off my sister's supplementary credit card. Richard picked up the file and began reading. The friendly demeanor vanished from his face, replaced by the cold, hard calculation of a corporate titan. I reminded him that Vanguard Financial was currently under strict observation by the Securities and Exchange Commission following the scandal we navigated 2 years prior. I pointed out that Preston's actions constituted a massive compliance violation for him. He was using client assets and risk management protocols to extort a family member. If the federal regulators caught wind that a vice president was deploying corporate algorithms for personal domestic disputes, the firm would face millions in fines and a devastating media cycle that even I could not fix. The silence in the grand office was heavy. Richard Sterling understood the magnitude of the liability sitting in his ranks. Preston had become a dangerous wild card. Richard picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. He ordered the compliance department to immediately release all my business holds. He told them to unlock every single account associated with my public relations firm. He also demanded a full internal audit of Preston's recent system access logs. Within exactly 3 minutes, my phone buzzed with notifications. The holds were lifted. My payroll was processed. My business was entirely secure. I thanked Richard for his swift action and stood up to leave. I had achieved exactly what I came for. I neutralized Preston's attack and severely jeopardized his standing at the firm. But as I reached for the polished door handle, Richard suddenly called my name and stopped me right there. I turned around to see him opening a small biometric safe hidden behind his desk. He pulled out a sleek silver flash drive and held it out toward me. His expression was grim. "Maya, you saved my career 2 years ago, and you just saved my firm from a massive nightmare today," he said quietly. "I consider my debts paid in full, but you need to take this flash drive now. You might want to look at what your brother-in-law has been doing with your Grandpa Winston holding accounts lately. He is stealing. Good luck out there, Maya." I walked out of Richard Sterling's office, holding the silver flash drive like it was a loaded weapon. The cool metal pressed against my palm as I stepped into the elevator and descended to the ground floor. I did not go back to my public relations firm. A discovery of this magnitude required absolute privacy. I directed my driver to take me straight home to my secure home office. My mind was racing, connecting invisible dots that were suddenly appearing in plain sight. I locked my front door, booted up my encrypted laptop, and inserted the drive. A single folder appeared on the screen labeled simply Winston Holdings Internal Audit. I opened it and clicked on the master spreadsheet. As a crisis manager, I am trained to look at financial disasters without flinching, but the numbers staring back at me made my blood run cold. Preston was not just skimming off the top. He was orchestrating a massive systematic embezzlement scheme directly from Grandpa Winston real estate empire. Row after row of data revealed offshore transfers, dummy corporations, and unauthorized wire routing. Preston had been siphoning millions of dollars from the family holding accounts for the past 3 years. But the most pathetic part was where the money was going. He was not buying islands or funding secret companies. He was desperately trying to cover massive losses from catastrophic cryptocurrency bets. My arrogant brother-in-law, the man who constantly belittled my career and praised his own financial genius, was a terrible gambler drowning in digital debt. He was stealing from the very family he married into just to keep his head above water. Suddenly, his erratic and vicious behavior from the past few weeks made perfect sense. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the glowing screen as the entire puzzle snapped together. Preston's desperation to keep me funding my parents' lavish lifestyle was not just about greed or maintaining social status. It was a calculated distraction. Grandpa Winston was a meticulous businessman who audited his trust accounts rigorously. But he generally left my parents' operational budget alone as long as their primary bills were paid and no red flags were raised. By secretly forcing me to pay Vivian and Marcus' mortgage, Preston ensured their accounts always looked perfectly balanced to the family accountants. If I stopped paying the mortgage, as I just did, the bank would send a foreclosure notice. A foreclosure notice would trigger an automatic comprehensive financial audit by Grandpa Winston's legal team. That audit would inevitably trace back to the holding accounts exposing Preston embezzlement. Preston did not care about Chloe losing her credit card or my parents losing their house. He was terrified of Grandpa Winston finding out he was a thief. He attacked my business and tried to take my children because his own freedom was on the line. Right as this realization settled over me, my phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. I answered and immediately heard the sound of loud theatrical sobbing. "Maya, please, you have to help me," Chloe cried, her voice shaking with manufactured panic. Preston is packing a suitcase right now. He says he is leaving me if I cannot fix the situation with Mom and Dad. He is so stressed about their foreclosure that he is taking it out on our marriage. You are destroying my life over a stupid grudge. Just pay the mortgage, Maya. Please, I am begging you. It was a masterful performance of playing the victim. She wanted me to feel guilty for her crumbling marriage. She wanted me to believe that my refusal to be financially abused was the root cause of her husband packing his bags. A few weeks ago, this kind of manipulation might have triggered a sliver of sisterly guilt. Today, it just made me sick. Preston is not packing his bags because of a mortgage, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice ice cold and perfectly steady. He is packing because the walls are closing in on him. If your husband leaves you, it has absolutely nothing to do with my bank account, and everything to do with the secrets he is keeping in his own. What are you talking about? Chloe snapped, her fake crying stopping instantly. Her tone shifted from desperate to defensive. You always try to make Preston look bad, because you are jealous he is successful. I am not jealous of a man who builds his life on a foundation of sand, I replied. Do not call me again, Chloe. You and your husband can clean up your own mess. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the desk. I looked back at the spreadsheet detailing the stolen millions. I had the smoking gun. I had the exact evidence needed to send Preston to federal prison and permanently shatter the fake wealthy facade my parents had worshipped for so long. The only question was how to deliver the execution. Before I could formulate my strategy, the doorbell rang, echoing through the quiet house. I closed my laptop, safely ejecting the flash drive, and slipped it into my pocket. I walked to the front foyer and checked the security monitor. A man in a sharp black uniform stood on my porch holding a small clipboard. He was a private courier. I opened the door. The courier did not ask for my name. He simply handed me an elegant, thick envelope sealed with black wax. I recognized the embossed family crest stamped into the wax immediately. It was the official crest of Winston Holdings. I thanked the courier and closed the door, breaking the wax seal with my thumb. Inside was a single piece of heavy white cardstock, written in perfectly elegant calligraphy. It was not a polite request or a casual family invitation. It was a mandatory and highly unusual summons from Grandpa Winston, demanding the immediate presence of the entire family for a formal dinner tomorrow evening at his primary estate. The final reckoning had officially arrived, and I was now absolutely and perfectly prepared to finish this war once and for all. The heavy black envelope sat on my passenger seat the entire drive to Grandpa Winston Estate the next evening. The gold-embossed crest gleamed under the passing streetlights. A summons from the patriarch of the family was never a casual affair. It meant business. It meant scrutiny. And tonight, it meant a final reckoning. I pulled my car up to the massive wrought iron gates of the property. The security guard recognized me immediately and waved me through without hesitation. I drove up the long, winding driveway, lined with ancient oak trees, feeling a profound sense of calm. I was not the terrified people-pleasing daughter anymore. I was the executioner. I handed my keys to the valet and stepped through the towering mahogany front doors. The grand foyer smelled of fresh lilies and expensive cedar. I walked toward the formal drawing room, where the low hum of classical music and clinking crystal glasses echoed. The moment I crossed the threshold, the scene before me looked like a perfectly staged photograph of generational wealth. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, were standing by the marble fireplace. Vivian wore a stunning silver evening gown, dripping in diamonds that I had undoubtedly paid for last year. Chloe and Preston were perched on a velvet sofa. Preston looked slightly pale, his usual arrogant posture replaced by a rigid, nervous energy. He was clutching a glass of scotch so tightly his knuckles were white. Chloe, on the other hand, was completely oblivious to her husband's impending doom. She was laughing loudly, sipping champagne, and acting as if she owned the entire estate. The moment Vivian spotted me, her fake smile vanished. She excused herself from my father and marched directly toward me. She grabbed my arm with a surprisingly strong grip and pulled me into a secluded alcove near the hallway. Her eyes darted around nervously, ensuring no one else could hear us. Maya, what are you doing here? Vivian hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I received the exact same mandatory summons you did, Mother, I replied smoothly, pulling my arm out of her grasp. Grandpa Winston called a formal family dinner. I am family. Vivian narrowed her eyes, glaring at my tailored emerald dress. Listen to me very carefully, Maya, she warned. Preston just spent the last 2 hours in a private meeting with your grandfather. He pitched a massive new real estate investment portfolio. We desperately need this capital injection to cover our current cash flow issues since you decided to be so incredibly selfish with your money. Preston is about to secure a multi-million-dollar deal that will save this family. Do not you dare ruin this night for us. If you sit quietly, behave yourself, and act like a respectful daughter, we might throw you some crumbs when the deal closes. We might even forgive your little tantrum. I looked at my mother, feeling a wave of absolute pity. She had no idea. She actually believed Preston was securing a new investment to save their sinking ship. She did not know that Preston was desperately trying to secure those funds to replace the millions he had already stolen from Grandpa Winston offshore accounts. He was trying to plug a massive hole before the auditors found it. My mother was defending a thief who was actively robbing her own father. I am not here for your crumbs, Mom, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I am here for the main course. Before Vivian could respond, the heavy double doors at the end of the drawing room swung open. The classical music seemed to quiet down respectfully. Grandpa Winston stepped into the room. Even at 80 years old, he was a terrifyingly sharp and commanding presence. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and held a silver-topped walking cane, not out of necessity, but as an accessory of pure power. He surveyed the room with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. The fake smiles plastered instantly onto the faces of my family members. Chloe sat up straight. Preston practically leaped off the sofa, attempting to look confident. Marcus and Vivian rushed forward, offering eager and overly enthusiastic greetings. Grandpa Winston accepted their pleasantries with a simple nod, moving past them gracefully. He walked directly toward me. The room grew uncomfortably silent. My grandfather stopped in front of me and looked me up and down, analyzing my posture and my expression. Maya, he said, his voice deep and resonant, you look remarkably well for someone who was just rushed into an emergency operating room. Thank you, Grandpa, I replied, holding his gaze. I recover quickly. I had to. He nodded slowly, tapping his cane once against the hardwood floor. A serious medical crisis is a terrifying thing to face, he noted, turning his head slightly to look at my parents. But family is supposed to be the ultimate safety net during such vulnerable times. Is that not right, Vivian? My mother stiffened, her hands clutching her expensive evening bag. She recognized the weight of his question, but her addiction to maintaining a perfect image overrode her common sense. She stepped forward, wearing a mask of pure maternal devotion. Oh, absolutely, Dad. Vivian lied, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It was a terrifying ordeal for all of us. But family comes first. I dropped everything the moment I heard she was in pain. I rushed straight to the hospital, and I did not leave her bedside for a single second until I knew she was safe and recovering. I was right there, holding her hand through it all. Chloe nodded vigorously from the sofa, backing up the blatant lie. We were so worried about her, Grandpa. We practically lived in the waiting room. Grandpa Winston looked at my mother, his expression entirely unreadable. Is that so? He asked softly. Yes, Dad, Vivian confirmed, smiling warmly at me. I would never abandon my daughter in her time of need. I looked at my mother, listening to the absolute conviction in her voice. She was so accustomed to getting away with her lies that she believed her own fabricated reality. I did not yell. I did not call her a liar. I simply reached into my emerald evening clutch. My fingers wrapped around the small metallic cylinder I had packed specifically for this moment. I pulled out a high-quality portable Bluetooth speaker. I held it up, pressing the power button, and waited for the small blue light to blink, indicating it was connected to my phone. The small chime of my Bluetooth speaker connecting to my phone echoed through the cavernous drawing room. Vivian's smile was still frozen on her face. Her blatant lie about staying by my hospital bedside hung heavily in the air. She genuinely believed her performance was flawless. She had spent decades relying on my silent compliance, assuming I would simply swallow her lies to keep the peace. But the daughter who used to protect her secrets died on that emergency room operating table. The woman standing before her now was a professional crisis manager holding the ultimate receipts. I did not raise my voice. I did not call my mother a liar. I simply looked her directly in the eyes and tapped play on my phone screen. The pristine acoustics of Grandpa Winston's formal drawing room amplified the audio recording perfectly. The loud thumping bass of a Taylor Swift pop concert blasted from the speaker, cutting through the elegant classical music playing in the background. Then Vivian's own voice filled the room. It was slightly distorted by the phone connection, but it was unmistakably hers. Every single syllable rang out with devastating clarity. Maya, Chloe, and I are in the VIP tent. Do you have any idea how hard it was to get these tickets? This cost more than your car. I watched the blood completely drain from Vivian's face. Her perfectly powdered skin turned the color of ash. Chloe gasped, bringing a trembling hand up to cover her mouth. Then my own voice played from the speaker, weak and breathless, begging for help. Mom, please. My appendix is bursting. I am being wheeled into surgery in 10 minutes. The kids have no one else. The recording continued, delivering the final fatal blow. Vivian's voice dripped with pure irritation and disgust. You are always such a nuisance and a massive burden. You could have timed this better. Honestly, you are ruining the mood of our bonding trip. Just call an Uber for the kids. I have to go. Taylor is coming on stage right now. Stop calling. The sharp click of the phone hanging up echoed through the room. I pressed a button on my phone, stopping the playback. I slipped the device back into my emerald clutch. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy silence that pressed down on my family like a physical weight. The elite social mask they had worn for their entire lives had just been violently ripped away, leaving nothing but their ugly, selfish reality exposed for the patriarch to see. I slowly turned my attention to Grandpa Winston. His expression had shifted from that of a composed host to a predator calculating a lethal strike. His eyes narrowed into dangerous, chilling slits. He leaned his considerable weight onto his silver-topped cane and looked at Vivian with a level of pure, unadulterated disgust that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. Grandpa Winston was a man who built a real estate empire from nothing, fighting tooth and nail to establish a legacy for his bloodline. Family loyalty was his ultimate commandment. Hearing his own daughter abandon her child for a concert ticket was an unforgivable treason. Marcus panicked. My father was a man who survived entirely by avoiding conflict and protecting his own comfort. Seeing his wife publicly destroyed and his access to the family wealth threatened pushed him over the edge. He completely ignored the horrific reality of the recording. Instead, he chose to attack the messenger. "How dare you, Maya!" Marcus shouted, his face contorting with desperate rage. He lunged forward, breaking the paralyzing silence. "You come into this house and disrespect your elders. You air private family business in public like a common thug. Give me that speaker right now." He reached out aggressively, fully intending to snatch the device from my hands and smash it against the marble floor, as if destroying the speaker would magically erase the truth. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I simply took one graceful, measured step backward in my high heels. Before Marcus could even come close to touching me, Grandpa Winston raised a single commanding finger. Instantly, 2 massive private security guards stepped out from the shadows of the arched hallway. They wore immaculate dark suits and moved with terrifying speed. They intercepted Marcus before he could take another step, grabbing him by both arms and shoving him firmly backward. Marcus stumbled, struggling against their iron grip, but he was completely overpowered. He stood there panting, looking humiliated as the guards held him in place. "Order will be maintained in my house," Grandpa Winston stated, his voice barely above a whisper yet carrying the force of a thunderclap. It was in this chaotic, highly charged moment that Preston decided to make his move. Preston had always relied on his corporate background and his identity as a wealthy white finance executive to assert dominance over our family. He believed his status made him the smartest, most rational person in any room. He looked at my parents, crumbling under the pressure, and decided he needed to take control of the narrative to protect his own access to the Winston empire. Preston stepped forward, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He stood tall, attempting to project absolute authority. He looked directly at Grandpa Winston, completely disregarding the damning audio evidence that had just played. He decided to use his privilege to tone police the situation, assuming the billionaire patriarch would naturally side with another corporate businessman. Sir Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension and false reason. I apologize for this disruption. Maya is clearly unhinged and going through a severe mental episode following her surgery. We should handle this unfortunate family drama privately. You really should not have to listen to this ghetto behavior in your own home. The word hung in the air. Ghetto. It was a fatal, deeply arrogant mistake. Preston had just crossed a line he could never uncross. He stood there looking incredibly smug, waiting for Grandpa Winston to thank him for restoring order. Instead, the temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. Ghetto behavior. Grandpa Winston repeated the phrase softly, letting the two words hang in the freezing air of the dining room. He did not raise his voice, but the underlying rage radiating from him was palpable. The heavy silence that followed was suffocating. Even the private security guards who had just restrained my father stood perfectly still. Grandpa Winston slowly turned his head to look directly at Preston. The billionaire patriarch had spent his entire life building an empire from the ground up, fighting through decades of systemic prejudice to establish a legacy for his black family. And here was this arrogant white man, standing in the middle of his house, using a racially charged dog whistle to insult his granddaughter. Preston realized his massive mistake almost immediately. He saw the lethal expression on Grandpa Winston's face and the color rapidly drained from his own cheeks. He tried to backpedal, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Sir, I did not mean it like that," Preston stammered, his usually smooth corporate voice cracking under the intense pressure. "I simply meant that this kind of public emotional outburst is beneath the dignity of your estate." I was trying to maintain decorum, but apologies have never been Preston's strong suit. His entire identity was built on absolute arrogance and a deep-seated belief in his own superiority. When cornered, his natural instinct was not to show genuine remorse, but to attack. He straightened his expensive suit jacket, puffing out his chest as his white savior complex completely took over his fragile ego. "Listen to reason, sir," Preston continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "You cannot possibly take Maya seriously right now. Look at her. She is a bitter single mother trying to tear apart a happy family because her own life is a miserable failure. She is lashing out because she is jealous of Chloe and me. I am a senior vice president at Vanguard Financial. I deal with high-level assets and logic every single day. Maya deals in gossip and public relations spin. She engineered this entire dramatic spectacle to manipulate you and distract everyone from her own pathetic shortcomings." I stood quietly near the marble fireplace, letting him dig his own grave. When a narcissist is handing you the shovel, you do not interrupt them. I watched my mother Vivian and my sister Chloe looking at Preston with wide, terrified eyes. They had spent years treating him like a god, worshipping his corporate title and bending over backward to accommodate his massive ego. Now they were watching their golden boy self destruct in real time. But Preston was not finished yet. His unhinged rant was just building momentum. His true colors were finally bleeding through the pristine corporate facade. He pointed an accusing finger at Vivian. He did not care that this woman had treated him like royalty since the day he married Chloe. He did not care that she had chosen to attend a concert instead of caring for her own flesh and blood simply because she wanted to impress his wealthy social circle. He only cared about saving his own skin. He turned his venomous glare toward my parents, who were still cowering near the dining table. "And frankly, sir, I am the only person keeping this entire family financially literate," Preston declared, pacing across the room. "If it were not for my guidance, Marcus and Vivian would have bankrupted themselves years ago. They are completely financially incompetent. They are nothing but financial parasites draining resources to buy country club memberships and designer clothes they cannot actually afford. I spend half my life managing their ridiculous debt and covering up their embarrassing cash flow problems. They worship me because they know they would be absolutely nothing without my connections and my expertise. Chloe let out a strangled sob hearing her perfect husband degrade her parents so viciously. Vivian clutched her chest, looking like she might actually faint from the sheer humiliation. They had sold their souls and abandoned their own flesh and blood to appease a man who secretly despised them. Preston was calling them parasites to their faces in front of the one man they feared most. The extravagant diamond necklace around my mother neck suddenly looked like a heavy chain. The tailored tuxedo my father wore seemed to swallow his shrinking frame. They had traded their dignity for a lifestyle they could never sustain on their own. Now the very person they relied on was tearing them apart piece by piece. The beautiful irony was that Preston genuinely believed this speech would save him. He thought Grandpa Winston would respect his brutal corporate honesty. He thought degrading my parents would make him look like the rational, pragmatic leader of the family. He thought throwing them under the bus would secure his own position in the billionaire good graces. He was spectacularly wrong. Grandpa Winston did not blink. He listened to the entire vicious tirade with a face carved from stone. He watched Preston panting and red-faced standing in the center of the room expecting praise. The patriarch leaned forward, resting both of his weathered hands heavily on the silver handle of his cane. He looked at the arrogant white finance executive who had just insulted his family, his daughter, and his legacy. The silence stretched out for a long, agonizing minute. The tension in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. The faint classical music playing in the background stopped completely, adding tension. Preston forced a nervous smile, clearly unsettled by the lack of immediate validation from the patriarch. "If you are the brilliant financial savior of this family," Preston Grandpa Winston said, his voice echoing with terrifying, icy precision, "if you are the only one capable of managing complex assets and maintaining our wealth, then perhaps you can explain something to me right now. Explain the $4,200,000 missing from my offshore holding account." Preston stopped breathing entirely. The arrogant smirk that had been permanently plastered across his face vanished in an instant, replaced by a look of absolute sheer terror. His eyes darted wildly around the room as if searching for a hidden exit. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Only a pathetic, quiet, stammering sound escaped his throat. The wealthy finance executive who had just seconds ago declared himself the intellectual savior of our family was now trembling like a cornered thief. He looked at Grandpa Winston, and then his eyes snapped directly to me. In that moment, Preston finally realized the true magnitude of the trap I had set for him. He realized I had not just locked him out of my firm accounts, I had completely audited his entire life. I did not give him a chance to formulate a lie. I stepped away from the marble fireplace and walked deliberately toward the massive mahogany dining table. Every eye in the room followed my movements. I reached into my emerald clutch one last time and pulled out a thick, heavy black folder. It contained the printed spreadsheets, the wire transfer logs, and the dummy corporation records I had extracted from the flash drive Richard Sterling gave me. I placed the folder on the polished wood and slid it directly across the table to Grandpa Winston. It stopped perfectly in front of him. "These are the internal audit logs from Vanguard Financial, Grandpa," I said, keeping my voice clear and professional. "They detail a highly coordinated embezzlement scheme executed over the past 36 months. They show exactly how your trusted son-in-law bypassed your risk management protocols to funnel your real estate capital into his own hidden offshore accounts." Preston panicked. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He took a frantic step toward the table, holding his hands out as if he could physically push the evidence away. "Sir, you cannot listen to her," Preston begged, his voice cracking under the strain. He was sweating profusely now, a stark contrast to his earlier pristine appearance. He looked incredibly small. "Those documents are completely out of context. Maya does not understand corporate finance. She is misinterpreting standard asset management procedures. What you are looking at is simply an aggressive tax strategy. I was executing a complex capital reallocation to shield your portfolio from capital gains penalties. It was a temporary liquidity maneuver designed to maximize your quarterly yield. You have to believe me. I was protecting your wealth. Grandpa Winston did not even look at Preston. He put on his reading glasses and opened the black folder. He silently scanned the top page, his jaw tightening with every line he read. I did not let Preston hide behind his ridiculous corporate jargon. I turned to face him, folding my arms. A temporary liquidity maneuver, I asked, raising an eyebrow. That is a very creative way to describe stealing your grandfather money to cover your own catastrophic cryptocurrency losses. You thought you were a crypto visionary. You leveraged grandpa commercial assets into unregulated digital tokens, lost millions in a single market crash, and then spent the rest of the year trying to steal your way out of the massive hole. Preston choked on his next breath. Vivian and Marcus gasped simultaneously, staring at their son-in-law in pure, unadulterated horror. Let us break down your aggressive tax strategy for everyone in the room, Preston, I announced, stepping closer to him. On June 14th of last year, you initiated a blind wire transfer of $250,000 from the Winston Commercial Holding account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Less than 48 hours later, you and Chloe flew first class to Milan for a 2-week luxury vacation. You posted pictures drinking vintage champagne on a private balcony. Did that champagne taste better knowing Grandpa Winston paid for it? Preston shook his head rapidly, opening his mouth to deny it, but I cut him off instantly. On November 2nd, you authorized another transfer. I continued, my voice echoing off the walls. This one was for a massive $800,000. The routing numbers match perfectly with a maritime brokerage firm in Miami. You used the stolen capital to pay the exact down payment on the 70-foot luxury yacht Chloe flaunted all over social media. You named the boat Generational Wealth, which is incredibly ironic, considering you were actively draining the actual generational wealth of this family to buy it. You are not a financial genius, Preston. You are a terrible gambler who got in too deep and decided to rob an 80-year-old man to fund your desperate fake lifestyle. The dining room felt like a vacuum. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, were completely paralyzed. The man they had worshipped, the man who had just called them financial parasites, was standing before them exposed as a common criminal. They had sold out their own daughter for a thief. Chloe had been standing near the sofa, completely frozen since Grandpa Winston mentioned the missing $4 million. But hearing the exact details of the yacht purchase finally snapped her out of her shock. Her entire world was built on the illusion that she had married a brilliant, wealthy man. That illusion was now shattering into a million sharp pieces. She realized that her elite friends would soon find out she was married to a fraud. She rushed toward the dining table, her designer heels clicking frantically against the floor. She snatched the top page of the spreadsheet right out of the folder before Grandpa Winston could stop her. Her eyes frantically scanned the highlighted rows, the dates, and the massive withdrawal amounts, matching perfectly with her most lavish purchases. She realized instantly that she was holding the evidence of a federal crime. She realized that her perfect elite life was entirely funded by stolen money, and she was about to go down with a sinking ship. Chloe's manicured hands began to shake violently. The paper crumpled in her tight grip. She looked up from the document and turned her gaze slowly toward her husband. The look of pure venom on her face was something I had never seen before. She marched right up to Preston, slapping the spreadsheet hard against his chest. "You told me that money was your executive bonus," she screamed, her voice tearing through the room. "You told me you earned that luxury yacht. You lied to me." Chloe stood trembling with a crumpled spreadsheet in her hand. The realization that she had married a common thief completely shattered her delicate reality. She did not hesitate for a single second to choose her own survival over her wedding vows. Chloe spun around to face Grandpa Winston, her designer heels clicking sharply against the floor. She pointed a manicured finger directly at her husband. "Grandpa, you have to believe me," Chloe pleaded, her voice echoing with desperate panic. "I had absolutely no idea he was doing this. I thought he was a financial genius. He told me he was receiving massive executive bonuses from his firm. He even bragged about setting up hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands to shield his wealth from domestic taxes. He said he was protecting our future, but he was actually hiding stolen money. You have to look into those Cayman accounts. That is where he hides everything. The entire dining room inhaled sharply. Chloe had just delivered the final fatal blow. She completely threw him under the bus to save her own access to the family trust fund. She eagerly provided the exact location of his hidden offshore accounts without a second thought. Preston finally snapped. The polite elite finance brother mask he had worn for 4 years fell off completely and shattered into pieces. His face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. The veins in his neck bulged as he glared at the woman he had promised to love and protect. "You pathetic, ungrateful gold digger!" Preston screamed violently, taking a threatening step toward Chloe. "You think you can just play the innocent victim here? You knew exactly what kind of lavish lifestyle you demanded. You bled me dry every single day. You constantly whined about needing luxury cars, designer bags, and constant vacations to show off to your shallow little friends. Do not stand there and act like a naive housewife. You happily spent every single dollar I brought home, and you never once questioned where it came from as long as your closet stayed full." Chloe shrank back quickly, her eyes wide with terror as Preston unleashed his fury. "You are nothing but a spoiled parasite," Preston continued, his angry voice echoing loudly. "You could not even afford your own Taylor Swift concert tickets last month. You had to use Maya credit card to pay for your VIP experience while she was dying in a hospital. You and your parents are completely broke. You have nothing. I was the only thing keeping you relevant in this city, and now you are trying to turn on me to save your own pathetic skin." Vivian and Marcus could no longer stand by and watch their golden child be verbally destroyed. They rushed forward, attempting to intervene and save Chloe from the vicious attack. Vivian stepped between Preston and her daughter, puffing out her chest in a desperate show of maternal defense. "Do not you dare speak to my daughter that way," Vivian shrieked loudly. "We trusted you, Preston. We welcomed you into our elite family. We gave you our blessing and you betrayed us all. You are a criminal. We are the victims here today. We had absolutely no idea you were stealing from my father." Preston let out a dark, maniacal laugh. He looked at Vivian and Marcus with absolute disgust. "Victims," he mocked. "You two are the biggest accomplices in this entire room. You turned a blind eye to every single red flag because I kept the champagne flowing. You gladly accepted my expensive gifts and let me pay for your extravagant country club dinners. You knew I was covering your massive financial black holes, and you never asked a single question because you were too busy pretending to be royalty. You allowed a thief into your family, and you happily took your cut." Marcus grabbed Preston by the collar of his expensive suit. "Shut your mouth right now," Marcus growled. "You are not dragging us down with you. We are Winston blood. You are just a fraud who married in." Preston shoved Marcus away forcefully, sending my father stumbling backward into a dining chair. "You are a joke, Marcus," Preston spat out, adjusting his suit jacket. "This whole family is a joke. I took what I deserved for managing your incompetence." The scene had devolved into a pathetic, chaotic brawl. The family members who had spent their entire lives judging me and calling me a burden were now actively destroying each other in the middle of a formal dining room. They were tearing each other apart like desperate animals fighting over scraps. Vivian was crying hysterically. Chloe was screaming accusations. Marcus was throwing empty threats. Preston was viciously exposing their deepest financial insecurities to everyone present. They had completely forgotten that the billionaire patriarch was sitting quietly at the head of the table watching their entire disgusting performance unfold. I stood silently near the fireplace, observing the absolute destruction of their fake wealthy empire. My crisis public relations training taught me that sometimes the best strategy is simply to step back and let the guilty parties destroy themselves. I did not need to say another word. They were doing all the heavy lifting for me. I felt a profound sense of closure watching them battle over the consequences of their own greed. Grandpa Winston watched the chaotic shouting match with an expression of pure, icy detachment. He had seen enough. He did not need to hear another excuse or desperate accusation. He raised a single weathered hand into the air. The movement was slight, but it commanded absolute authority. The screaming stopped instantly. Vivian clamped her mouth shut. Marcus froze in place. Chloe backed away from her husband. Preston stood panting in the center of the room. Grandpa Winston pressed a button under his desk. Red and blue police lights immediately flashed outside the massive estate windows, illuminating the room completely, forever ending their reign. Red and blue lights painted the walls in sharp, strobing colors. The heavy doors swung open with a resounding crack, making everyone jump. 4 plainclothes detectives marched into the room, followed closely by 2 uniformed police officers. They moved with absolute tactical precision, ignoring the crystal chandeliers and scattered designer bags. They bypassed my terrified parents and walked straight past a trembling Chloe. The lead detective, a tall, stern man, held up a silver badge. He did not ask questions. He locked his eyes directly on the arrogant finance executive standing by the table. Grandpa Winston remained seated at the head of the table, completely unfazed by the police presence. He casually adjusted his silk cuffs and looked at Preston. "Did you genuinely believe I do not monitor my own wealth, Preston?" my grandfather asked, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "I knew about the missing $4 million 3 weeks ago. I simply needed the routing numbers to seal your fate." Maya handing me this folder tonight merely confirmed what my investigators suspected. I forwarded her digital evidence to the federal authorities before we even sat down for dinner. "You walked into a slaughterhouse tonight and thought it was a negotiation." Preston staggered backward, hitting the dining table. The pristine corporate armor he wore for years evaporated in seconds. The lead detective stepped forward, grabbing Preston by the shoulder and forcefully spinning him around. Preston let out a pathetic whimpering sound as the detective pushed his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly through the room. The sound was incredibly satisfying. It was the sound of ultimate accountability catching up to a man who thought his privilege made him entirely bulletproof. Preston struggled against the officers, his face red and slick with sweat. He looked absolutely pathetic. He turned desperate, wild eyes toward his wife. "Chloe," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "Chloe, you have to call my lawyers right now. You have to tell them this is a massive misunderstanding. Tell them I was managing the family assets. Tell them you authorized those transfers for the yacht. We are married, Chloe. You cannot let them take me away. You have to save me." Chloe's reaction was a masterclass in pure selfishness. She looked at her handcuffed husband, the man who had just verbally destroyed her in front of our family. She saw a sinking ship and had absolutely no intention of drowning with him. She physically turned her back on him. She reached into her expensive designer clutch, pulled out a gold compact mirror, and began powdering her nose. She checked her lipstick in the reflection, completely ignoring the desperate man screaming her name behind her. She did not shed a single tear for him. Her only concern was making sure her makeup was flawless when she spoke to the authorities. The detectives grabbed Preston by his arms and began marching him toward the grand double doors. The reality of his impending federal prison sentence finally crashed down on him. He realized his wife had abandoned him, his father-in-law had destroyed him, and I had successfully orchestrated his absolute downfall. The desperation morphed into pure, venomous spite. If he was going down, he was going to drag everyone else straight down into the dirt with him. He dug his expensive leather shoes into the hardwood floor, resisting the officers just enough to look directly at my parents. Vivian and Marcus were huddling near the fireplace, trying to make themselves look invisible. They thought they survived the carnage by staying quiet. Preston made sure they did not escape the crossfire. "You think you are walking away from this?" Marcus Preston screamed, his voice echoing frantically down the long hallway. "You think you are innocent, Vivian. Tell the detectives the truth. Tell them about the hush money. They knew everything. I swear to you they knew." The detectives slowed their pace, dragging Preston to a temporary halt. The lead detective turned around, raising an eyebrow at the sudden explosive allegation. Preston continued his desperate rant, spitting out the words with absolute malice. "I transferred $200,000 into their personal checking account last December. They found out about a missing deposit from the commercial trust and threatened to tell Grandpa Winston. I paid them off. They took a massive cut of the stolen money to keep their mouths shut so they could maintain their fake wealthy lifestyle. They are accomplices. They are guilty. You have to arrest them too. Check their bank records. Check the December deposits. They took the hush money and spent it on country club dues. They let me rob this family blind because they were getting paid to look the other way. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. My parents' fake elite facade was completely obliterated. They were not just negligent, they were active willing accomplices in the theft of their own family empire. They sold out their patriarch for a few $100,000 to keep up appearances. The lead detective signaled for the officers to hold Preston in the doorway. The detective slowly walked back into the dining room, his heavy footsteps tapping against the floor. He approached Vivian and Marcus, pulling a small notepad from his jacket pocket. He looked at my parents with a cold, calculating stare. "Is this true?" the detective asked, his voice commanding and sharp. "Did you accept unreported funds to conceal a federal financial crime?" Vivian realized she was trapped. The evidence was in the bank records, and Preston was going to testify against them to reduce his own sentence. She could not lie her way out of a federal investigation, so she resorted to her favorite manipulation tactic. Vivian gasped dramatically, placed the back of her hand against her forehead, and collapsed onto the cold marble floor in a theatrical swoon that fooled absolutely no one. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut, echoing with a finality that made the remaining family members flinch. The flashing red and blue lights gradually faded from the tall estate windows as the squad cars drove down the long driveway, taking Preston away to his new reality in federal custody. The sheer chaos of the arrest left a ringing silence in its wake. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, remained frozen near the fireplace. Chloe stood alone, looking at the empty doorway where her husband had just been dragged out in handcuffs. I watched as Grandpa Winston calmly adjusted his suit jacket and walked slowly back to the head of the long dining table. He did not look like a man who had just orchestrated the arrest of his own son-in-law. He looked like a king who had just finished taking out the trash. He pulled out his high-backed leather chair and sat down, resting his hands on the polished wood. He did not yell. He did not slam his fist on the table. He simply let the suffocating quiet stretch out, forcing the three remaining traitors to drown in their own mounting panic. When he finally spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a devastating earthquake. "You have all fundamentally misunderstood the purpose of my wealth," Grandpa Winston said, looking directly at Vivian, Marcus, and Chloe. "You believed my money was a shield designed to protect you from the consequences of your own mediocrity. You believed my empire existed simply to fund your country club memberships, your designer wardrobes, and your fragile social egos. You allowed a thief to sit at my table because he bought you expensive champagne and flattered your vanity. You sold your integrity for the illusion of superiority. You have disgraced the bloodline that elevated you. You chose shallow status over your own family. The very foundation of this empire was built on protecting our own people. You shattered that foundation for absolute vanity." Vivian opened her mouth to defend herself, but Grandpa Winston raised a single finger, silencing her instantly. "I am entirely finished speaking to you, Vivian," he stated coldly. "You are no longer required to speak in this house. In fact, none of you are. I called this dinner tonight to witness a necessary cleansing." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek silver pen, setting it down deliberately on the table. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, my legal team executed a complete restructuring of the Winston Family Trust," he announced, his words dropping like heavy stones. "Vivian, Marcus, and Chloe, you have been permanently and irrevocably stricken from all family accounts, all property deeds, and all future inheritances. You will not receive another single cent from my estate. Your trust funds have been legally dissolved. The financial parasite you nurtured has been removed, and you have been completely cut off." Marcus' legs gave out entirely. My father, the man who had spent his entire life coasting on his family name, collapsed to his knees right there on the expensive Persian rug. The harsh reality of losing his entire identity and his financial lifeline broke him completely. He began to weep loudly, letting out desperate, ugly tears that held absolutely no dignity. "Dad, please," Marcus begged, crawling slightly toward the head of the table. His voice was thick with pure panic. "You cannot do this to me. I am your son. I have your blood in my veins. You cannot throw your own flesh and blood out into the street. We made a mistake, but we are family. Please, Dad, I am your only son. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to Maya right now. I will make this right. Just do not take away my trust fund. I cannot survive without that money." Grandpa Winston looked down at the weeping man on the floor with absolute zero sympathy. He did not see a son. He saw a coward who had sold his soul for a few luxury car leases. "You stopped being my son the day you called your own child a nuisance while she was bleeding on an operating table," Grandpa Winston replied, his voice cutting through Marcus' pathetic sobbing like a razor blade. "You abandoned your daughter at the doors of death so you could listen to pop music in a VIP tent. A man who abandons his own child has no father. You forfeited your right to my name the moment you let greed replace your humanity." Chloe suddenly stepped forward, walking right past her weeping father on the floor. Her husband was currently on his way to federal prison, and her parents were just completely disinherited, but her toxic entitlement completely blinded her to her own destruction. She glared at Grandpa Winston, her face twisted in an ugly mask of pure jealousy. "If you are cutting us out, then who gets the estate?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. "You cannot possibly give it to her." She pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Maya is just a public relations agent. She cleans up messes for celebrities and corporations. She does not know the first thing about running a massive real estate empire. She will destroy everything you built. You cannot hand the Winston legacy over to her. It is not fair." Grandpa Winston did not argue with Chloe. He did not defend my career or my capabilities. He simply reached inside his suit jacket one more time. He pulled out a thick document bound in dark leather, bearing the official seal of the state, and placed it squarely on the center of the mahogany table. "This document has been fully prepared, reviewed, and verified by my top attorneys over the last 48 hours. It represents the permanent and immediate conclusion to your reign of parasitic entitlement in this family. And now it is finally over for good." Grandpa Winston placed his hands flat on the polished mahogany table. The room was still. My parents and sister stared at the thick, leather-bound document he had just produced. Their pure greed kept them rooted to the spot. They desperately hoped for a loophole. They hoped he would hand the reins to a corporate proxy. They were wrong. Grandpa Winston slid the document across the table. It did not stop in front of Marcus. It bypassed Vivian completely. It slid straight down the long table and came to a gentle halt directly in front of me. I looked down at the heavy parchment. The gold seal of Winston Holdings gleamed under the chandelier light. I opened the cover. It was not just a will or a temporary power of attorney. It was an immediate succession plan. Grandpa Winston looked at me with pride. He addressed the room with absolute finality. "I have spent 50 years building this empire," he said. "I built it to provide security for people who understand the value of hard work and loyalty. I am stepping down as Chief Executive Officer effective immediately. I am transferring all controlling shares, all voting rights, and the entire executive power of Winston Holdings to the only person in this family who actually earned it. Maya is now my sole successor." Chloe let out a sound that was half shriek, half gasp. Her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated jealousy. She stomped her foot on the floor like a petulant toddler. "You cannot do this!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is just a public relations agent. She does not know anything about real estate or commercial development. She is going to ruin our family legacy." Grandpa Winston did not even look at her. "You have no family legacy, Chloe," he stated coldly. "You are dismissed." Vivian, however, took a completely different approach. My mother realized instantly that her entire financial future now rested solely in my hands. The woman who had abandoned me in a hospital bed suddenly remembered she was a mother. Her face shifted from horror to a sickeningly sweet display of maternal affection. She clasped her hands together and forced tears into her eyes. "Oh, Maya, my sweet girl," Vivian cried, stepping toward me with her arms wide open. "I am so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you were destined for greatness. We can run this empire together, just you and me. We are family, and family sticks together." She tried to hug me. She reached out her diamond-covered hands, expecting me to fall into her embrace and forgive decades of abuse simply because we shared DNA. I did not move. I stood perfectly still and let her arms wrap around empty air. I took one deliberate step backward out of her reach. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing calm tone. Vivian's arms fell to her sides. She looked genuinely shocked that her manipulation tactic had completely failed. She actually believed her fake tears would erase the memory of my suffering. "You told me to call an Uber when I was bleeding to death, Mom," I reminded her, watching her eyes widen in fear. "You said I was a nuisance and a burden because I interrupted your pop concert. Well, I took your advice. I actually called an Uber for you. It is waiting outside right now to take you back to your foreclosed house. Your credit cards are frozen, your bank accounts are empty. You have absolutely nothing left to your name." Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus, begging him to do something to save her, but my father was completely broken. Marcus tried to step forward, but his legs were still shaking from the shock of being disinherited. He stared at the floor, entirely defeated by his own cowardice. Chloe began to cry genuine tears of absolute despair, realizing that her luxury lifestyle was permanently over. Grandpa Winston nodded to the two massive security guards standing in the arched hallway. "Gentlemen, please escort these guests off my property," he commanded. "They are trespassing." The guards stepped forward immediately. They did not use excessive force, but their grip was firm and undeniable. They grabbed Marcus by his arms and directed Vivian toward the front doors. Another guard guided a sobbing Chloe down the hallway. I walked to the grand front windows and watched the final scene unfold. The heavy oak doors opened, revealing a torrential downpour outside. The storm had rolled in while we were eating dinner, sending sheets of freezing water across the paved driveway. The security guards pushed my parents and my sister out into the freezing rain and shut the doors firmly behind them. The loud click of the deadbolt echoed through the foyer, sealing their fate. I watched through the glass as Vivian, Marcus, and Chloe stood shivering in the driveway. Their luxury vehicles had already been repossessed earlier that day. They had no money for taxis. They had no elite friends left to call. The socialites who once attended their lavish parties had already heard about their financial ruin and turned their backs on them. They were completely stripped of their wealth, their status, and their power. The expensive designer clothes they wore were completely soaked, sticking to their skin as the freezing rain beat down on them mercilessly. They huddled together under the harsh glow of the security floodlights, looking exactly like the pathetic frauds they truly were. For my entire life, they made me feel like an outsider in my own family, making me beg for basic human decency while they lived like royalty. Now the roles were permanently reversed. They were finally forced to face the cold, harsh reality of the real world entirely on their own, while I stood safely inside the warm, protected fortress of the empire I now controlled. 6 months passed since the torrential downpour washed my family out of my life and off the Winston estate. The freezing rain of that night gave way to a blistering, bright Atlanta summer. I stepped out of the back of a sleek black town car, letting the morning sun hit my face. I wore a tailored ivory power suit with a subtle emerald silk blouse underneath a quiet nod to the dress I wore the night everything changed. My heels clicked with sharp authority against the concrete as I walked toward the towering glass facade of the Winston Holdings skyscraper. I was no longer the exhausted public relations executive scrambling to cover my Mother Country Club dues. I was the sole chief executive officer, of a billion-dollar real estate empire. The moment I walked through the revolving doors, the energy in the grand lobby shifted. Security guards stood a little straighter. The receptionists offered genuine warm smiles instead of the fearful, nervous glances they used to reserve for my grandfather. I greeted them by name as I made my way to the private executive elevator. The ride to the top floor gave me a moment to reflect on the absolute whirlwind of the past half year. Taking over a massive corporate entity was not a ceremonial title. It was brutal, exhausting work. Preston had left behind a web of toxic financial liabilities and a boardroom full of complicit, enabling executives who looked the other way while he stole from the family trust. I did not just trim the deadweight. I took a machete to the entire corporate structure. Within my first 30 days as CEO, I fired every single vice president and board member who had ties to Preston offshore embezzlement scheme. I replaced the old corrupt boys club with brilliant, diverse, fresh talent. I promoted brilliant young analysts who had been previously overlooked. I brought in aggressive compliance officers to ensure nobody could ever siphon a single cent from our holdings again. The company culture transformed overnight from a den of toxic nepotism into a fierce, highly functioning meritocracy. Winston Holdings was stronger, more profitable, and more secure than it had been in a decade. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to the penthouse suite. My executive assistant Elena was already waiting at my desk with my morning espresso and a detailed briefing binder. Elena was one of my first hires, a sharp, incredibly competent woman who did not care about elite social circles or country club gossip. She cared about efficiency and results. I walked into my massive corner office and set my leather briefcase on the polished mahogany desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. I built a career fixing disasters for other people, but standing here looking out over the city, I knew my greatest achievement was finally fixing my own life. I took a sip of my espresso and opened the first financial report of the day. The numbers were immaculate. We had just closed a major commercial development deal that Preston had almost ruined with his gross incompetence. I was drafting a congratulatory email to our acquisitions team when the secure intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. It was unusual for Elena to interrupt my scheduled morning review time. I pressed the button, leaning forward. "Go ahead, Elena," I said. "Miss Winston." Elena began, her tone strictly professional, but carrying a faint edge of tension. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation developing down in the main reception lobby. Security just flagged me. A woman is currently at the front desk demanding immediate access to the executive elevator. She does not have an appointment and she is not on the cleared visitor list." I kept my eyes on my computer screen. "Who is it?" I asked calmly. "She says her name is Chloe Preston," Elena replied. "She is being highly uncooperative with the front desk staff. She is claiming that she is the sister of the chief executive officer and that she has absolute VIP clearance to come up to the penthouse. Security refused to let her pass the turnstiles. She is starting to raise her voice and create a public scene. The head of security wants to know if you want her escorted off the premises or if we should involve local law enforcement immediately." I stopped typing. The cursor blinked rhythmically on the blank white screen. Chloe. My golden child sister. The woman who had stood in a hospital and called me a burden. The woman who had happily spent stolen money to buy a luxury yacht was currently standing in the lobby of my building. She was trying to use the very familial connection she had spent 32 years denying just to bypass a security guard. The irony was absolutely delicious. 6 months ago, Chloe would have breezed through those doors flashing a platinum credit card. I paid for acting like she owned the very air in the building. Now she was trapped on the ground floor, throwing a tantrum because her elite status had been entirely revoked. She had no money, no husband, and no power left. I leaned back in my leather chair, tapping my pen against the desk. A lesser person might have told security to throw her out into the street. A bitter person might have gone down to the lobby, just to humiliate her in front of the morning commuter crowd. But I was not bitter. I was a businesswoman. And in business, you always gather information before you make a move. You observe your opponent when they are desperate, because desperation always reveals their true motives. I pressed the intercom button, holding it down firmly. Do not call the police, Elena, I instructed, keeping my voice perfectly smooth and detached. Tell security to print her a temporary visitor badge. Have them escort her directly to the executive elevator right now. I released the intercom button and leaned back in my leather chair. The silence in my penthouse office was profound. I turned my chair slightly to face the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. 5 minutes passed. I tracked the time not with anxiety, but with the cold calculation of a chief executive waiting for a scheduled appointment. I heard the faint chime of the private elevator arriving on the top floor. My office doors opened slowly. Elena stood in the doorway, gesturing for my visitor to enter. Chloe walked into the room. I almost did not recognize the woman standing before me. 6 months ago, my sister would have stormed into this office wearing a fresh-off-the-runway Chanel suit, holding a $10,000 Birkin bag, and screaming demands. The woman who stood on my plush carpet today was a ghost of her former self. The designer bags were completely gone. Her hair, which used to be styled weekly at a premium salon, was pulled back into a messy, uneven ponytail. She was wearing a faded beige blouse from last season's Zara and a pair of scuffed flat shoes. She looked entirely disheveled, exhausted, and deeply humbled by reality. Chloe hesitated at the threshold. She looked around the massive executive suite, taking in the mahogany desk, the original artwork, and the sheer power radiating from every corner of the room. Her eyes finally landed on me. I did not stand up to greet her. I did not offer her a warm, sisterly embrace. I simply gestured to the leather guest chair positioned directly across from my desk. "Sit down, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. She walked forward, her shoulders slumped, and sank into the chair. She placed a cheap canvas tote bag on her lap, gripping the handles tightly. She looked down at her unpolished fingernails, unable to make direct eye contact with me. I waited. In negotiation, silence is always your greatest weapon. You let the other person fill the void because they will inevitably reveal their desperation. Maya. She began, her voice cracking immediately. I know I have absolutely no right to be here. I know you probably want to call security and have me thrown out into the street. If I wanted you thrown out into the street, you never would have made it past the front lobby, I replied evenly. You are sitting in my office. That means you have exactly 5 minutes to tell me what you want before I call my next meeting. Chloe took a ragged breath and finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and heavy with dark circles. Preston was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison last month. She said, the words tumbling out of her mouth like broken glass. The government seized absolutely everything. They froze our joint accounts. They auctioned off the yacht. They took the luxury cars. Whatever was left over went directly to paying his criminal defense lawyers. I have nothing, Maya. I have absolutely $0 to my name. I kept my expression completely blank. I am aware of the federal sentencing, Chloe. It was highly publicized in the financial news networks. But that does not explain why you are sitting in my corporate office today. I need a job, Chloe blurted out, leaning forward desperately. I need a job right now, Maya. I had to move into a terrible tiny apartment across town. I am currently working a minimum wage retail job folding sweaters at a discount mall just to afford groceries. I cannot live like this anymore. I am drowning. I thought maybe because we are family you could give me a position here. I could be a project manager or a marketing director. I know how to talk to wealthy clients. I know the social scene. I can be valuable to Winston Holdings. I just need a 6-figure salary to get back on my feet. I listened to her desperate plea with absolute patience. A year ago, I would have felt a crushing wave of guilt. I would have felt obligated to rescue her, to give her a high-paying title just to keep the peace and earn my mother approval. But the woman who used to set herself on fire to keep her family warm was dead. I did not mock her. I did not laugh at her ridiculous request for a 6-figure executive role, despite having 0 corporate experience. I did not remind her of the time she told me to pay her $18,000 flower bill. I simply opened the top drawer of my mahogany desk. I pulled out a single sheet of standard white printer paper and a black ink pen. I placed them on the polished wood and slid them directly across the desk until they stopped right in front of her. Chloe looked down at the paper. It was not a contract for a marketing director position. It was a standard entry-level employment application. "This is an application for a mailroom clerk," I stated, my voice cutting through her delusions with clinical precision. "The starting pay is $18 an hour. You will be sorting packages, delivering internal memos, and managing shipping logistics for the junior staff. You will clock in at 8 in the morning and you will leave at 5 in the afternoon." Chloe stared at the application, her face flushing red. A mailroom clerk. She whispered, her old toxic pride fighting a sudden war against her new crushing poverty. "Maya, I cannot work in a mailroom. I am your sister. People will see me. They will laugh at me. Everyone starts at the bottom here, Chloe," I replied, locking my eyes onto hers. The days of nepotism and unearned luxury in this company died the exact night Preston was dragged out in handcuffs. She looked down and finally signed the paper in absolute, utter, defeated silence. 6 months after being thrown out of the Winston estate, my parents Marcus and Vivian lived a reality they spent their entire lives mocking. They were currently residing in a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment on the far industrial outskirts of Atlanta. The building had peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, and a broken elevator that forced them to walk up 4 flights of concrete stairs every single day. The sprawling mansion they once occupied was now just a bitter memory. Without my income paying their mortgage and without Grandpa Winston Trust Fund to fall back on, their financial collapse was absolute and brutal. Their days of catered meals and private chefs were replaced by discount grocery stores and instant noodles. Marcus, who used to wear custom-tailored Italian suits, now spent his days sitting on a cheap second-hand sofa, staring blankly at a small television screen. His spirit was completely broken by his own cowardice and the loss of his elite status. Vivian, however, refused to accept her new reality. Her addiction to high society and public validation was a sickness she could not shake. She spent hours in their tiny bathroom, applying heavy makeup and polishing the few pieces of jewelry she managed to hide from the bankruptcy lawyers. She believed their current situation was just a temporary misunderstanding. She thought she could simply smile and charm her way back into the elite African-American social circles of the city. On a sweltering Friday evening, Vivian decided it was time to make her grand return to society. The annual Crystal Rose Charity Gala was taking place at the most exclusive country club in Atlanta. It was an event my parents attended every year for the past decade, usually funded by the credit cards I paid off. Vivian forced Marcus to put on his only remaining tuxedo. She squeezed herself into a faded emerald evening gown, holding her head high as if she still owned the city. They could not afford a luxury black car service, so they were forced to take a standard ride-share vehicle that dropped them off a block away from the venue to save money. Vivian linked her arm through Marcus' arm and marched toward the grand entrance of the country club. The entrance was lined with red velvet ropes and guarded by private security. Crystal chandeliers glowed from inside the main ballroom, and the sound of elegant jazz music floated through the warm evening air. Vivian put on her best fake smile, ready to greet her wealthy friends and pretend they were simply staying at a boutique hotel while renovating their estate. She walked right up to the main podium where the event coordinator stood with a digital guest list. "Good evening," Vivian said, projecting her voice so the couples waiting in line could hear her. "Marcus and Vivian Winston. We are ready for our usual table near the main stage." The event coordinator, a sharp young woman in a black dress, tapped her tablet screen. She looked up at my parents and then looked back down at her screen. Her professional smile vanished completely. "I am sorry, Mrs. Winston, but your names are not on the guest list tonight," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the music. Vivian let out a high-pitched forced laugh. "There must be a mistake. We are legacy members of this club. My father is Elijah Winston. Just check the master list again." The coordinator did not flinch. I did check the master list, Mrs. Winston. Your country club membership was officially revoked 4 months ago due to severe non-payment of dues. You currently have an outstanding balance of $12,000. Furthermore, the gala committee was explicitly instructed not to admit you to any affiliated events. I am going to have to ask you and your husband to leave the premises immediately. The surrounding guests went entirely silent. The wealthy doctors, lawyers, and corporate executives who used to attend Vivian dinner parties were now staring at her with absolute pity and disgust. They had all heard the rumors about Preston going to federal prison and my parents being completely disinherited. Now they were witnessing the pathetic reality with their own eyes. Vivian's face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of red. She looked around desperately for a friendly face, but her former socialite friends actively turned their backs on her, pretending not to see her standing there. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the podium. "We need to leave right now, Vivian," he muttered, his voice shaking with pure shame. "Do not make this any worse than it already is." They walked away from the glowing entrance of the country club, retreating into the humid, dark streets of the city. Vivian was hyperventilating. The sheer public humiliation shattered her last remaining delusion. She realized that without my money, and without Grandpa Winston's name, she was absolutely nobody. She was exiled from the only world she ever cared about. She pulled her cell phone from her cheap clutch, intending to call anyone who could help. She dialed a number, but an automated message immediately informed her that her cellular service had been disconnected for non-payment. She let out a frustrated scream. Marcus pointed to a glowing convenience store on the corner. They walked inside, the bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Vivian approached the cashier and begged to use the store landline telephone. The cashier slid the phone across the counter without saying a single word to her. Vivian's fingers trembled as she dialed the only number she knew by heart. She dialed my private cell phone. She listened to it ring, praying I would answer to save her from this miserable existence. The ringing stopped. A clear, professional, automated voice filled Vivian's ear. "You have reached the office of the Chief Executive Officer of Winston Holdings. I am unavailable, prioritizing my children. Please leave a message after the tone and have a blessed day." A few weeks after Vivian made her pathetic phone call from a convenience store, the Winston estate was completely transformed. It was not prepared for a rigid, pretentious country club gala. It was decorated for the 6th birthday of my twins, Leo and Mia. I stood on the sprawling back terrace watching the caterers set up a massive bouncy castle and an interactive science station. In the past, whenever my mother hosted a party on these grounds, every single detail was agonizingly curated to impress people she secretly hated. Children were expected to sit quietly, in stiff, uncomfortable clothes, so they could be paraded around as props for elite socialites. Today was completely different. Today was about pure, unadulterated joy and love. The guests began arriving shortly after noon. The driveway was not filled with desperate social climbers looking for a networking opportunity. It was filled with genuine people who actually loved and supported us. My lead accountant, Elena, brought her family. Richard Sterling, the chief executive officer who had handed me the flash drive that took down Preston, arrived wearing a casual linen shirt and carrying 2 massive wrapped presents. My crisis management team, the people who had stood by my side during 80-hour work weeks, were laughing and sharing food at the picnic tables. The air smelled of barbecue and fresh lemonade. There was no fake networking. There was no toxic whispering in the corners. It was just real, authentic love and endless, pure happiness for us all. I watched Leo and Mia running across the manicured lawn, chasing a swarm of floating bubbles. They were shrieking with laughter, completely free from the heavy expectations I had grown up carrying. Sitting under the shade of a massive oak tree was Grandpa Winston. He wore a comfortable beige summer suit and rested his hands on his silver-topped cane. He was watching the twins with a look of absolute, profound pride. He had spent decades building a financial fortress, but sitting there watching the genuine happiness echoing across his property, I knew he finally realized what true legacy looked like. It was not just about the money anymore. It was about surrounding yourself with good, honest people who would absolutely never sell your precious soul for a cheap luxury handbag today. Around 3 in the afternoon, my head of security approached me discreetly. He was a broad-shouldered man who handled the perimeter with absolute precision. He held a small, crinkled manila envelope in his gloved hand. "Ms. Winston," he said, keeping his voice low so the nearby guests would not hear. "A courier just dropped this off at the main gate. The return address lists a postal box on the industrial side of the city. We scanned it and cleared it for safety, but I wanted to bring it directly to you right now safely." I took the envelope from him. I recognized the cramped, slanted handwriting immediately. It was from Marcus and Vivian. My parents had scrounged together enough spare change to hire a cheap courier service. I stepped away from the lively party, walking into my private study, just off the main terrace. The room was quiet. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a generic, heavily discounted birthday card. The front featured a cartoon bear that looked like it had been sitting on a pharmacy shelf for a decade. I slowly opened the card. The message inside was not an apology. It was not a genuine wish for the happiness of their grandchildren. It was just another pathetic, transparent manipulation tactic. "Maya, we know you are still angry," the message read. "But family is family. The twins need their grandparents on their special day. We are currently living in unbearable conditions. If you could just find it in your heart to send a small allowance, we could move closer and rebuild our relationship. Please do not punish the children by keeping us away. We truly love you." I just stared blankly at the cheap paper. 6 months ago, a message like this might have triggered a massive wave of guilt. I might have questioned my own morality. I might have wondered if I was being too harsh by letting them live in poverty. But looking at those words today, I felt absolutely nothing. They were still using my children as leverage. They were still trying to extract cash by playing the victim. They learned absolutely nothing from their spectacular downfall. I did not sigh. I did not shed a single tear. I walked directly over to the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting next to my mahogany desk. I turned the machine on. I fed the generic card and the manila envelope into the metal teeth. The machine whined loudly, instantly reducing their desperate manipulative words into tiny, meaningless strips of confetti. I watched the paper disappear, feeling the last remaining invisible thread connecting me to my toxic parents finally snap and break. They were no longer my burden or my responsibility. They were just two absolute strangers dealing with the natural, harsh consequences of their own extraordinary greed here today. I slowly turned off of the heavy shredder and walked back toward the tall glass doors leading to the bright sunny terrace. Before I could even step outside, Grandpa Winston suddenly appeared right in the grand doorway. He held 2 crystal glasses filled with sparkling apple cider, since I preferred to stay completely sharp during family events. He handed one tall glass to me and looked past my shoulder directly at the shredder bin filled with fresh paper scraps. He knew exactly who had sent that pathetic package, and he knew exactly how I had handled it. He gently clinked his cold crystal glass against mine. The sound was bright and clear, ringing with absolute finality. "You did really good, kid," Grandpa Winston said, his deep voice carrying a weight of tremendous respect and profound admiration. "You finally broke the toxic cycle today." Grandpa Winston telling me I broke the toxic cycle was not just a passing compliment. It was the absolute truth, and the beginning of a completely new era for our entire family. The physical manifestation of that victory arrived in my office exactly 1 week after the twins' birthday party. Elena walked into my suite carrying a heavy sealed legal dossier from the federal prosecutor office. I opened it and read the final sentencing report. Preston, arrogant financial empire, had officially been reduced to a simple inmate number. The judge showed absolutely no mercy during the federal hearing, sentencing him to a mandatory 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary. Furthermore, the court ordered the complete liquidation of his remaining hidden assets, successfully recovering every single dollar he stole from Grandpa Winston offshore accounts. The funds were fully restored to the Winston Holdings Master Trust. That very same morning, closing the dark chapter of his theft forever. I closed the heavy legal folder feeling a profound sense of closure. The man who tried to destroy my family and steal my children was gone, and the parents who enabled him were living with the harsh reality of their own greed. But securing justice in a courtroom was only half of the equation. I needed to balance the scales in the real world. I instructed my driver to take me to a very specific location downtown. We did not go to a corporate boardroom or a luxury development site. We pulled up to the emergency room entrance of Atlanta General Hospital. It was the exact same hospital where I lay bleeding and terrified just a few short months ago, while my mother screamed at me for interrupting her pop concert. Walking through those sliding glass doors today felt entirely different. I was no longer a desperate, vulnerable patient begging for help while my family partied. I was the chief executive officer of a billion-dollar empire, ready to change lives forever. The hospital chief of medicine and the board of directors were already waiting for me in the main administrative conference room. I did not waste time with corporate small talk. I handed them a certified bank draft that made the chief of medicine physically gasp. It was a multi-million-dollar endowment, funded directly from the recovered corporate assets. I established the Leo and Mia Winston Emergency Care Fund. I outlined the strict parameters of the donation clearly. The money was not for generic hospital renovations or administrative bonuses. It was specifically earmarked to create a round-the-clock on-site emergency child care facility for single mothers experiencing sudden medical crises. No woman fighting for her life in this hospital would ever have to choose between getting emergency surgery and keeping her children safe. They would never have to rely on a toxic family member who viewed them as a burden. The hospital board accepted the terms immediately, their faces glowing with absolute gratitude and immense relief. As I walked out of the administrative wing and headed back down the bustling emergency corridor, I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned around and saw a woman in dark blue scrubs rushing toward me. It was Sarah, the exact same surgical nurse who had held my hand and wiped the sweat from my forehead, while the anesthesia took over on the darkest day of my life. She looked at my sharp, tailored suit and then at my face, her eyes widening in recognition. "Maya," she said, breathing heavily, stopping a few feet away from me. I heard the hospital administrators talking about the new emergency childcare center. "I saw your name on the internal memo. I cannot believe you did this. You came back here today to help us and to save other mothers from suffering." I smiled at her, feeling a sudden wave of genuine warmth. "I promised myself I would never let another mother feel the way I felt in that room, Sarah," I replied, keeping my voice steady and sincere. "You held my hand when the people who were supposed to protect me completely abandoned me. Your kindness kept me grounded when my entire world was falling apart. This donation is just a reflection of the care you showed me that day." Sarah reached out and hugged me tightly. It was a fierce, genuine embrace that meant more to me than any elite socialite fake kiss on the cheek. In that beautiful, quiet moment, standing right there in the middle of a chaotic emergency room, I realized that my trauma had completely lost its grip on me. The agonizing pain, the bitter rejection, and the crushing betrayal from my parents had been entirely transmuted into pure, unadulterated power and absolute purpose. They tried to bury me under their greed, but they only gave me the exact foundation I needed to build something spectacular. I said goodbye to Sarah and walked out the automatic sliding doors of the emergency room. I stepped out onto the wide, concrete sidewalk, taking a deep breath of the warm, fresh summer air. I looked up at the clear, bright blue sky, feeling an overwhelming sense of ultimate freedom. The heavy chains of my toxic past were permanently severed. Right? At that exact second, my private cell phone buzzed in my suit pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. A bright, genuine smile spread across my face. It was my new partner calling. He was a brilliant, handsome architect I met during a commercial real estate acquisition a few months ago. He was a man who respected my power, celebrated my ambition, and loved my children like they were his own. I answered the call, hearing his deep, comforting voice on the other end of the line. "Hey, beautiful," he said warmly, his tone filled with nothing but pure, honest affection. "I am finishing up at the firm early today. What time are we having family dinner tonight, my love?" The evening sun cast a warm, golden glow across the expansive dining room of my new estate. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the freezing rain that washed my toxic family away 6 months ago. I sat at the head of the mahogany dining table. I was not relegated to the corner. I was not an afterthought. I was the matriarch of my own newly forged empire. To my immediate right, my 5-year-old twins Leo and Mia were giggling uncontrollably. They were attempting to build a precarious tower out of their dinner rolls. In the past, my mother would have scolded them for ruining her aesthetic. Tonight, their innocent laughter was the most beautiful music in the entire house. Grandpa Winston sat to my left. He looked 10 years younger. The heavy burden of managing a corrupt family had completely lifted from his shoulders. He was telling an animated story about building his firm, waving his fork for dramatic effect. Standing right behind my chair was David, my new partner. He leaned down and pressed a soft, warm kiss to my temple before pouring a rich, dark red wine into my crystal glass. He did not care about my net worth. He cared about my heart, and he loved my children as if they were his own flesh and blood. I took a deep breath, letting the peace of the moment wash over my entire soul. I looked around this table and realized the profound magnitude of my journey. Less than a year ago, I was lying on a sterile emergency room bed, bleeding and terrified. I had begged my own mother for help, and she told me I was a massive nuisance because I interrupted her VIP pop concert experience. I spent 32 years of my life carrying the crushing dead weight of people who only viewed me as a convenient wallet. They demanded my money, my time, and my sanity to fund their fake elite socialite fantasies. I used to believe that cutting off my biological parents and my sister would leave a massive, painful void in my life. I thought the guilt would eventually consume me. But sitting here tonight, I felt absolutely zero guilt. I felt nothing but pure liberation. Losing Vivian, Marcus, and Chloe was not a tragedy. It was a massive, necessary surgical extraction of a deadly poison. They were currently living out the harsh consequences of their own extraordinary greed, while I was sitting in a fortress of genuine love and untouchable security. They traded their daughter for a concert ticket and lost an entire empire in the process. A soft murmur of voices drifted in from the adjacent media room, where the large television had been left playing the evening news. The bright voice of a prominent national news anchor caught my attention. I turned my head slightly, listening to the broadcast. The anchor was highlighting a special segment on corporate leadership and community impact. Then my face appeared on the large television screen. It was a professional portrait taken during the hospital endowment ceremony. The news anchor announced my name with deep, unwavering respect. She highlighted my rapid, aggressive transformation of Winston Holdings, turning a stagnant real estate firm into a modern corporate powerhouse. But more importantly, she highlighted my philanthropic work. She spoke passionately about the Leo and Mia Winston Emergency Care Fund. She detailed how the multi-million-dollar hospital donation was already actively saving the lives of single mothers across the city, providing them with emergency, around-the-clock childcare during severe medical crises. She named me as one of the most influential Black female chief executive officers in the country. I listened to the broadcast without a single ounce of arrogance. I just felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. I had taken the most agonizing, traumatic moment of my entire existence and weaponized it into a shield for other vulnerable women. While Preston was sitting in a federal prison cell, staring at concrete walls, and Chloe was folding cheap sweaters for minimum wage, I was actively changing the world. While my parents were hiding in a cramped apartment, dodging collection calls, I was building a legacy of actual substance and real honor. I broke the generational curse that had poisoned our bloodline for decades. David took his seat next to the twins, smiling warmly at me. He raised his crystal glass into the air. Grandpa Winston stopped his story and raised his glass as well. Even Leo and Mia grabbed their small cups of apple juice, holding them up high in imitation of the adults. To Maya, David said, his deep voice carrying across the dining table with absolute sincerity. To the strongest, most brilliant woman I have known. I picked up my crystal wine glass. The deep red liquid caught the light of the chandelier hanging overhead. I looked at the beautiful, loving faces of the people who actually mattered. The people who showed up when I was bleeding. The people who stayed when the fake wealth was stripped away. I did not just survive the brutal betrayal of my toxic bloodline. I completely conquered it. I raised my glass slightly higher, taking in the beautiful reality of my new life. I looked directly forward, breaking the invisible barrier between my world and anyone who might be watching this story unfold. I smiled a genuine, relaxed, absolutely fearless smile. People always say that living well is the best revenge, but I realized tonight that they are entirely wrong. Revenge is always loud and messy and incredibly exhausting. What I achieved was so much better than simple revenge. I got my power back. I got my peace of mind back. I finally got my entire life back on my own terms. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my rich red wine, tasting the absolute sweetest victory imaginable as the screen slowly fades to a pitch black. The greatest lesson from my journey is that blood does not automatically make someone family. True family is built on respect, not exploitation. For years, I believed that if I provided enough financial support, my parents and sister would finally value me. Instead, they drained my resources and abandoned me in my darkest moment. I learned that walking away from toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate act of survival. You must strictly protect your peace. Please let me know your thoughts below, and always remember to subscribe for more empowering stories every single day.